Christian Buckley, who will be talking to you about how to achieve business value through social. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC Training Week. After the webinar we will have questions. Type any questions you have for Christian in the question pane in the control panel. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass over to our webinar presenter, Christian Buckley. Hello, Christian.
Having it off of mute always helps. And good morning. Good morning. Jump over to the presentation here. Getting ahead of myself here with the presentation. There we go. Can you see the presentation now?
Hi, Christian. No, I'm seeing I can see the presentation now. Sorry, slight delay.
Yeah, I think there's a slight delay though. So, well, good morning. Well, good afternoon for everyone.
Sorry, Christian.
Depending on where you're dialing in.
Sorry, Christian. It just momentarily cut out there. I can see it again now. Okay, we're perfect. We're good to go.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Yeah, let me know if it drops out. There seems to be a bit of a lag here, but so hopefully as I'm talking and switching between slides and a little bit of my environment, that it all goes smoothly. But good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending when you're dialing in from. This is it's an interesting session. It's always odd starting a presentation by saying it depends. But how to achieve business value through social, it really does depend. I'm just going to start there. Depending on what your business goals are, I think there's a number of ways that you can approach this conversation around social. And I think, and I'm going to come back to this point several times throughout, but the technology is the smallest part of the planning around social. I mean, there are tools that do certain things. We're going to talk about them, and I'll show you a few things. But it's really going to be talking a lot about the application of the why more than the how. For those that are not familiar with me, if I can get the slides to forward. There we go. My name is Christian Buckley. I'm a Office 365 MVP. I've been in the SharePoint space actively since leaving Microsoft since 2009. Some of you may know I was with a little company called Echo Technology that was acquired by a larger company called Exceller that was purchased by an even larger company called Metalogix. And then about 4.5 months ago, I joined GT Consult, who had been a partner of Exceller and Metalogix, based out of South Africa. And I mentioned I was starting to look at my next opportunity, knew the guys very well, and they said, we'd love your help in opening up the Americas. So that's what I do. I manage an office out of Bellevue, Washington, and we're a full-service consulting company, but we also do managed services. So we, if you're looking to outsource the administration of your SharePoint environment or your Office 365 environment, we do that. And so feel free to drop me a line. I can tell you more about what we do anytime. And this is, if there's anybody on the line who attended the SharePoint Connect in Amsterdam in November, this is a variation of the keynote that I did there. But it's worthy of bringing up in this conversation ongoing because people have questions about this. There's been a lot of talk since I'd say since just before the acquisition of Yammer by Microsoft a couple of years back, there was really starting to be a lot of conversation around social, that social was going to solve a lot of the problems that we had with SharePoint adoption and engagement. And I differentiate between adoption and engagement. Adoption is getting people to pick up the tools and use them. So, and honestly, most people measure adoption, like adoption of SharePoint is, oh, they logged in a given month. But engagement is different. It's the ongoing activity. Like I can show as a metric that I've adopted a platform because I logged in once this week. However, engagement means that I'm in there actively using the tools, using the workflows, using the process, uploading, sharing documents, having conversations, all of those things inside the environment. So as you can see, adoption and engagement, two very different measurements. Adoption is something that I think when we talk about some of the social activities, most people talk about, well, we're going to increase adoption, but it's really about increasing the level of engagement. Well, part of the problem with social and the way that we think of like Yammer as being a social tool, for example, is that it's this place that you go to be social. So when we want to go and talk with our friends, we go and chat inside of Facebook or whatever other social tool that's consumer-based that's out there. The problem is with the workplace is that social's not this place that you go to, that you separate from the way that you're working, your work activities, to go over to a social environment. And honestly, it's, and I kind of jokingly that have this, it's a state of being. And what I'm going to get into here is really that where social is more effective, it's when it's embedded into our workloads. It's embedded into, now Microsoft is using the term experiences across our platform. And so that's why you hear less and less talk about Yammer, or less and less talk about any single social or search-based capability, and you're hearing more and more about experiences, because it's that end-to-end experience that is really driving adoption and engagement within the platform. So I don't want to have to send people to a separate URL to go and be social around my project. I want that experience to be inline or embedded into the activity inside of my project, wherever people are working, whether it's inside of Outlook, if we're having an email conversation, if it's happening around a document or a presentation, wherever that activity is happening. And so here's just going to have a little bit of fun here, but what is the kind of social experience that most organizations are looking for? And when you ask 9 times out of 10 people that aren't, let's say, hardcore SharePoint people, like maybe most of you are, what kind of social experience are you looking for? The number one answer is, I want something that kind of looks like Facebook. And it's interesting. There was a couple articles out last fall that said no, what people want is not Facebook, because honestly, SharePoint and many other platforms have Facebook-like interfaces. You have the personal profile, you have the ability to go in and add some level of personalization, share files, share pictures, kind of make it yours, collaborate, find friends, be able to search through profiles, kind of all of those things which you get with the Facebook experience. Honestly, we've had inside SharePoint a variation of that with My Sites for quite some time. But that's not really what people want. What people want out of social is this. I don't know if any of you are actively using Pinterest. I'm not really a Pinterest user, but this is, I think I've got 2 pages, the first one being just kind of to experiment and play with it. This one, some of you may be aware that in my worldwide travels, I tend to take a lot of selfies. And let me just, in my own defense here, practical purposes here, I've got 4 kids. I was noticing a few years ago that I had a lot of pictures of my wife and my kids, and there were no pictures of myself. And I didn't want to be one of those as I got older, to look back at the pictures of all my kids and never see myself with my kids. And my wife just doesn't like taking pictures, so I started doing the selfie. So it was, it was out of self-preservation that I started the selfie thing. Now, but I created this Pinterest site to collect like the selfies of all the folks that I meet out in the community. But what's interesting about this is not, the selfies aside, what's different and powerful about Pinterest is that the intent behind the creation of these pages and each individual tile. And there are some great quotes. There was a Forbes cover article by the founders of Pinterest, and things that I didn't know, like Pinterest, the age of the company and the rate of growth and the rate of income, it is surpassing Google and is surpassing Facebook at this stage in their life. So it's really amazing to see how fast it's spreading. And what's different about this model, this view of collaboration and this view of social, because it is still collaboration that's happening. It's about what you aspire to do, what you want to do down the line. But there's a VP who had an even better quote here. It says, I'm organizing this into a place in my life. It's that people are going there with intent. So as I mentioned before, that people, if I go and pull down cards from my friend's Pinterest site, there's intent. They've shared something that I'm interested in, that I want to share, that I want to keep for myself. And so it's very powerful what you can do around that, going back to the view, with this Pinterest view of sharing each of those individual cards, of liking it, of following it, of creating your own boards and sharing that. So they were onto something there. And I have to believe that had something to do with the design of some of the new capabilities inside of Office 365. So just kind of going broad here, small team collaboration, fast and effective. If you're in a team of 5, which has been defined for years now as kind of the ideal side, 1 manager, 5 employees is that ideal, manageable, collaborative, most effective team size. And it can be fast and effective because, hey, there's 5 of you. You can do it through whatever medium you need. If you're sitting around an office, or even if you're all 5 or 6 of you are split up around the world, to pull people into a chat, to share documents, it can be very effective. The problem then is, how do you scale that what can be successful at the team level at that enterprise scale? It doesn't exactly scale out. It's more difficult to find people, to find knowledge, to find expertise. And so that's the goal of a lot of these organizations. They say, we want to be able to do what works at the small team level, but we want to be able to do that at the enterprise level. And the problem is then that we approach it entirely wrong. So we approach social from the technology, and we've all done this. And I think this has been a problem with SharePoint from day one, is that we think, okay, we're going to deploy it, we'll build it, and they will come. People will figure it out. We've given these tools. We provide a little training up front, maybe, and that they'll eventually figure it out. And it doesn't exactly work that way. And so why with the social technology we think it'll work that way, and we're making the same mistakes over and over again. But the problem is, we're rolling these things out, especially social capabilities, without understanding how it fits into the business. We're not understanding, does it even fit the way that our team culture, our corporate culture works? How is it aligned? It doesn't have proper executive support. In fact, 9 times out of 10, if you go and look at, in fact, if you go over to the Success Center in Office 365, and you'll look at, it calls out executive support. And some of the best examples of where social works, and I like to use, kind of the poster child for Yammer is Nationwide Insurance. And one of the reasons why it works, and some of the strongest stories coming out of the company, there's plenty of videos. If you go look up Yammer and Nationwide and just search for that online, you'll see some videos about this. But it's the fact that the executives from the very top of the CEO bought into the idea and used the technology because it was part of their culture. So there's a great video that was shared at the SharePoint conference a couple of years back as part of the keynote, where you have a customer support rep that identified a problem and had some ideas for a solution, and she entered it into Yammer, and a couple days went by and there were no comments, and the CEO found it and replied to it, which then opened up just this stream of people see, oh, the CEO is commenting on this idea, and they suddenly ran with the idea. And so it was a great example of how executive support can drive the adoption and level of engagement with the tools. It's critical to the success. But also having business process alignment. So what that means is, this is one of the it depends, depending on what your business is and what you're trying to achieve with the technology. I mean, if you're specifically using social to engage between, let's say, salespeople and the product team, is to go in and look at how that relationship works today. How are they collaborating? How are they, how do they, or where's the breakdown in communication between these teams? And then aligning the tools to effectively go and try and solve that problem. Not just rolling out generically, like here are these new tools, everybody go and figure out, but go in with a targeted view, saying here are the use cases that we are trying to solve. There may be 100 other use cases, but these are the targeted use cases that we're specifically trying to address here, and use that as the beachhead for releasing the capability for the rest of the company. And then you need to build advocacy. And this is one of the things, if anybody has been through, I don't mean to keep bringing up and talking about Yammer, because it's not all about Yammer. But if you've not been through any of the certifications, the power user, admin, community manager around Yammer, one of the greatest benefits in my mind around these trainings is that they constantly go back and train you on some basic social interaction and adoption and advocacy techniques. Ideas like someone comments, let's say you own a group, you own a topic, and so if people are in there adding comments, asking questions, making suggestions in that group, and no one ever responds, no one ever acknowledges those, and they just sit out there in the ether and just age, then that is going to, weaken the story, the value of what you've deployed, and it's also going to cause damage to the culture, to that individual. They've gone out on a limb, they've asked a question, they've looked for help, they've made suggestions, and no one's there. So it's this idea that you never let a comment go unanswered. And so that's something that I do. Even if I don't know the answer, if I know somebody that probably knows the answer, I forward that message. I just take a moment to do that. It's almost like, maybe this is not the best analogy, but like you're walking through a beautiful park. And we've all seen this too. There's a garbage can. And right next to the garbage can, there's a can on the ground. So to go in and actually like walk up, pick up the can, put it in the garbage can, walk on. It's like it's not your job to pick up all of the garbage around the entire park, but that's this one little thing that you can do because you're there. I think of that the same way when I'm going in and doing the social interaction, whether I'm in SharePoint or in Office 365, if I'm in Yammer, I don't know if anybody can see that flashing. I'm getting IM'd here. I'm going to have to switch that off in a minute. But that I can take a little bit of the time to go in and do some cleanup, to do some advocacy activities, and make the platform better for everybody across the board. All right. So, and the key to this, to making this work, is understanding how your team works today. This is another aspect of it. I mentioned, culture, knowing the cultural fit. Talking with a customer that was based in Central California, and the primary output of the company was cheese. That's right. It had a dairy side of the business, and they produced cheese. Well, they hired a brand new SharePoint consultant and admin, so they were a SharePoint shop, but they were on an older version of the platform, who was gung-ho about moving to 2013, the latest version, and wanted to deploy all of the social capabilities that came with it, all the native features. And hey, I'm supportive of that idea. The problem became very aware of right up front is that the rest of the organization was not social. They were not socially ready. It just wasn't the culture. It wasn't a fit for the way that the business did work. Now, there were needs for some of the social capability. They were having a lot of conversations around specific documents and around project teams. And they had a lot of private conversations that they wanted to have and keep and be able to archive as part of the, in relation to projects and documents. So they were doing social activity, but what didn't make sense was building these external communities, deploying Yammer, and kind of all of those other things. When you think of social, it didn't really fit. So it was a refining of that strategy. It was, I think, kind of fine-tuning and limiting the number of new features that were a fit for that team, and it really just came down to that idea of taking a look around. You may have very lofty goals about where you want to get your organization to, but in the meantime, it may mean limiting some of the capabilities that you make available because culturally you need to move them towards that vision, that ultimate goal. But for today, let's just iterate on what we're doing today and build from there. Have some successes, not scare people, and then move them forward. Your culture may be that they're ready for a complete rewrite of how they collaborate, and you have the ability to insert all of the new tools, align them with processes, and go from there. And that strategy is fine too. Just make sure that you're doing it with intent, that it's that you know that is what you're doing with your project. So understanding how people work, it's all about productivity. And Microsoft, of course, Satya Nadella at the Worldwide Partner Conference last summer talked about moving Microsoft over into this, the business is moving towards a platform and productivity strategy. And so you think about the social tools and Office 365, depending on your plans. It's not all about Office 365, but of course, most of the latest and greatest innovations are happening out in the cloud. We'll see here with the Ignite conference in May how much finds its way down to the next version of SharePoint Server 2016, so the next on-prem version. But that question that you should be asking constantly, this is kind of your running operational goal, looking at how you can implement social better, is look at productivity. How productive are our end users, and what can we do to make them more productive? So I talked about Satya in his presentation at WPC making the switch, and it was a dramatic switch. You probably remember Bomber, the last kind of a push for Microsoft was that Microsoft was going to be devices and services. And honestly, I always struggled with that description. I wasn't sure how that fit and how that translated down into everything that we were doing, certainly around SharePoint, Office 365, Exchange, Yammer, all the Office 365 SKUs. And so when Satya clarified that vision and said about platforms, meaning that technology can work wherever you are, we're going to expand the usability of our tools and then make people more productive. And that's why one reason why I really like the new language that's being used around experiences inside of Office 365, experiences inside of SharePoint, experiences because it fits so well with this idea of improving productivity. It's not about a simple product, but it's about that end-to-end experience across the entire platform. And similarly, the social tools should be about what is that end-to-end experience for our end users, for our project managers, for our support personnel, that end-to-end experience for our customers when they're interacting with our teams, and understanding how the tools, how social is going to help meet those goals. So why focus on productivity? It's really about simplifying that user interface, making it easier for people to go in and find each other, to align what they're doing day to day with the needs of the business, which is why we're deploying SharePoint in the first place, why we're considering these various social tools. We're not doing that just to keep ourselves employed in deploying tools. Hopefully that's not why we're deploying these things. But it is to improve the quality of and the speed at which we do business, and to streamline those business processes, to be able to flatten some of the organizational discussions and be able to make it easier for people who have the knowledge we're looking for to find the conversation and to participate within that. I mean, I will often go into the environment and I'll monitor certain tags, certain keywords, certain conversations in groups. Not that I'm participating day to day, but I'm monitoring because I have a certain level of expertise in different areas, and I can become very aware of what's going on there. I like the example of my last bullet here was, and to get more out of your IT investments. I mean, that's another key reason to focus on productivity. I like this simple example that when I joined Microsoft, so I had worked in the manufacturing technology sector for a number of years, so worked with very large, some of the biggest electronics manufacturing companies in the world, Hitachi, Sony, Selectron. On the telecom side, worked with Nortel, with Seagate, with Lucent, with a bunch of these very large companies, and helping to deploy supply chain and collaboration technologies. Well, I joined Microsoft, and I'm in a slightly different role. I was in a team. I joined in 2006. It was called Microsoft Managed Services, which became VPOS, which is now Office 365. So it was kind of the team that was chartered with creating the hosted version of SharePoint back in 2005, 2006. But having this other experience, I built into my profile that I had experience with this manufacturing technology. And a couple other things. Won't bore you with some of the acronyms, but I plugged them in the system, and right away I found two other people that had the same keywords on their profile. And so through those social capabilities, through the profile capability, through these keywords that I was monitoring, following, I was able to identify others that were interested in those topics and then go and collaborate with them, and it just kind of opened up these other opportunities, conversations, people that I would not have found otherwise. They would have never run into them in the cafeteria. Microsoft is a big company. They were several buildings over. But that I was able then to provide them with help on the SharePoint side of things. They were both in the sales organization dealing with a lot of these companies where I had contacts. So I could provide value to them. And here I just wanted to illustrate. I mean, we're sold on Microsoft's vision, but we do get lost in the details of deployment and adoption of the various SKUs. And that's something that there's no right answer for how you deploy the things that you use. It really is that, it depends, experience, but you need to go in with an intent on what you're trying to solve. I just want to talk briefly about the out-of-the-box social experiences, all the various tools. So the pieces that we're talking about. One of the biggest things that's out there, of course, you hear a lot about Office Graph. And I think some people get confused, like we're looking at the Office Graph. Well, Office Graph is something that's behind the scenes, is driving the machine learning that it puts intelligence behind a lot of the features that are being developed. It's not something like we're not looking at the Office Graph interface. Delve is not the Office Graph interface. Delve is a product that is made, or a feature, or let's use the new words, experience that utilizes the power of Office Graph. So Office Graph goes in and looks at your various sources of information. And right now it's really your OneDrive for Business, the content that's up in Office 365, as well as tapping into your hosted Exchange. So right now, it's only accessing content that's out in the cloud, but I suspect we're going to hear more at Ignite in May about cloud connectors into your file shares, into your line of business applications, and extensibility around that, as well as your SharePoint on-prem. So soon, you'll still only be able to consume a lot of the Office Graph capabilities and services that it enables via the cloud. However, you'll have access to data that is on-prem. And honestly, the thing that I'm waiting for the most is be able to access the Office Graph capability into Yammer, because I think that's the biggest gap for me now, because so much of what I do, the conversations that I have inside my company and in certain networks, is happening around Yammer. And so having that as part of the Delve experience is going to be very important to, I believe, the next stage of Delve. So of course you have Delve and boards, and I'm going to show you, I've got a demo system if you've not seen it live. It's not quite as pretty as you see here and in the slideware that Microsoft makes available, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But so Delve really is that Pinterest-like experience where it's all of the artifacts that I have available, all the artifacts that I can pivot based on things that I'm working on, things that my manager is working on, or that my team, my peers are working on, things that have been shared with me. I can go in and then it's intelligent. It learns from the way that I'm using content. So the idea that if I've got a meeting later today around a project, that Delve sees the level of activity from my team, from me, around that project in certain keywords, and it's going to bring to the top and surface content that's relevant to that thing which I'm active in, and then learn from. If I never open any of those, or if I'm constantly receiving and interacting with communications with one individual, it's going to raise that content to the surface. And boards are another great thing. I'll show you an example in the real world there, but similar to Pinterest, where sometimes you want to go grab a pin, and I want to save it, or I might want to share it with somebody, or I might want to collect it into my own Pinterest board, or in this case, a Delve board, where it could be content from across a dozen different projects. I may take one document here, a PowerPoint from somewhere else, a spreadsheet from somewhere else, but I want to look at it in relation to a project that I'm working on. And so I'll create a board and add those pins from various sites so that I can filter on that view. And I'll show you some examples of that. You then have the groups capability, and here's where you really see the word experience across applications, because what groups does, I don't have any shiny examples in my demo site, but I'll show you what I have there. But what's powerful about this is the group exists over inside of Exchange. It exists inside of Delve and the collection of content, the shared calendar. Soon will be aligned with, so Yammer group is created in relation to that group. So if I have a project team, I can continue that conversation around where people are working rather than pushing them out. This goes back to my initial slide. Instead of pushing them out to a yammer.com whack project team site, that Yammer conversation is happening in line within Outlook, around the content that we're editing, co-editing, around the calendar. So it's happening in line seamlessly where the team is actually collaborating. Show you a brief example around that. Of course, there is Yammer. There's still powerful examples of where Yammer can be useful. And even if your organization is not signed on to Yammer and using Yammer, as an individual, so much of the way that we interact as a community, where you get help, where you get guidance from Microsoft, is happening inside of Yammer. It's important that you're out and member of a couple of key groups. And the one you can see in the small picture here, I'll show it to you, but is the Office 365 network. You need to be a member of that. There are other groups that have pretty sizable populations where there's a lot of useful information. One is SPYAM as well. On the right, I've got, so I'm on the board of the Puget Sound, it's the Seattle area SharePoint users group. So we have our page. It's a place that we can specifically go in and collaborate around what's happening with topics like we're meeting later today and with the board meeting today. So we can have private and public conversations. But the Yammer is really about, in this form, so not inline, but as part of the Office 365 SKU or as the standalone Yammer.com, it's about communities of shared interests, communities of shared expertise, and it's still important to have in your overall social strategy to figure out where you need to go and build these communities. Honestly, where I use it the most is I have a number of partner organizations that are out there. Sometimes I have one community where I have multiple partners, some of which could be competitors, but in where we're able to collaborate and have these public discussions. Other times we may have separate networks that need to be kept private. It's flexible, and it really gives you options in how you go and collaborate with the various communities that you need to create and manage. And of course, I've talked about the inline social capability. So you're going to see this experience more and more. If you're using the Office applications online, for example, you're going to be able to collaborate with your team as you're co-editing something, have the archived conversation, the threaded conversation over on the right side around that. If you are using dynamic CRM, you're already seeing some of this embedded social conversation, which then is stored over in your Yammer, your Yammer.com site, and accessed through Office 365. But you're having this consistent social experience across the various workloads. And of course, you have the new Office 365 videos capability, which also has the Yammer conversations on the right, so that as you're uploading content and you're able to find those conversations and share relevant information and collaborate around those artifacts. I don't need to now go and have a conversation about what other training videos are available to my team. I can have that conversation right, so if somebody goes to one of these videos, they're going to find the conversation all around that. And it's really powerful. I mean, I often will find a link somewhere out, just out on the internet, and want to share that with my organization, go back into Yammer, I use the Yammer share button, and find that people are already collaborating around that URL, around that topic. And so it could just be a very powerful discovery tool. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but this is from Microsoft Marketing. I'm talking about Gartner Magic Quadrant, and there's also the Forrester Wave that shows that Microsoft is right up at the leading the capability around the social tools is right out at the forefront. There's a lot of exciting things. It's no longer that we're looking at Microsoft as being 2 to 4 years behind. Microsoft has caught up on so much in the social realm. Now, there are certainly other tools that are out there that have individual features which are very powerful, but Microsoft has a story that is robust across the board. I love this quote, and you've got the Senior VP and Chief Analyst at IDC that's talking about the adoption of the cloud, and social is a huge, huge piece of this. It's while there's so much, I know that we're all being sold fairly aggressively on moving to the cloud, moving to Office 365, and we're the leading reasoning is really economics. We're going to save money and scale better by moving there. But what a more powerful story is that it allows us to innovate more quickly. I talk a lot about the changing role of the IT pro, and there's the changing role of the developer experience as we move towards these cloud technologies. But it really comes down to, the historical view of SharePoint, for example, is that you need to have infrastructure people on staff that can maintain servers, that can keep things up and running and fine-tune and configure the environment. And while you still need to have some of that IT pro capability, the IT pro role changes as we move towards the cloud. From a business perspective, though, it's much more important to have that deep business that business alignment, business process alignment. But by focusing more on the business alignment, we're going to have solutions that more closely fit our culture, that more closely fit and answer those business needs, and it's going to allow us to innovate more quickly. Microsoft talks about why the cloud is so important to these technologies is because they can push out fixes, they can push out new features much more rapidly than the 3 to 4 year cycle that we've been used to for the last couple decades. And this allows them to innovate. But from our perspective, if we always have the latest and greatest features and new things that we're able to, some of which we can kind of gate, we can throttle how we deploy these new features to some degree. But it allows us to focus on usage of the technology rather than maintaining the technology, and thereby being able to innovate in our own businesses. So let's talk about this. I'm just going to show you a little bit about the out of the box, and hopefully, and Declan, if you're still there, we can make sure that this looks right, that you can still see my screen. And let me just make sure that I'm sharing the right thing here. Yep. So hopefully everybody can see my screen there. Just in my browser, and so here is just our my Delve board. You can see here. I mean, honestly, what is new inside Delve, and I'll just kind of scroll down. So you'll see the various cards. It's really littered with email that has come in since the email integration, and less around content. So I mean, here's a PowerPoint presentation around this. But if you see over here on the left, I can go in and look at, what are the things that I'm specifically working on, things that are being shared with me. I've gone in and started creating boards. So here's where I've said I found certain, this is an important metric right here, my angry cat metrics. But I can go in and look at things like, what are the partner materials that are, so as people are adding content into their OneDrive for Business or into Office 365, and I'm going in and creating these boards to make it more relevant, easier to find, like where are our company presentations that we're giving. We have a knowledge transfer internally, knowledge transfer activities. I'm not tagged a lot of content. Marketing materials that are specifically out there. So it's a quick way for me to go and collect, to tag this content, and then treat them as a group. So I can create a board around a project. I can go in and look at, okay, what's Warren working on? What is Brad working on? Okay, well, that is part of the real-world experience. Let me go over this. This is if you're not very familiar with Office 365. So over the top left, you have the app launcher. They also refer to this as the waffle. But you can get into all the apps that you have access to. So I'm actually going to go over to Outlook, and I'm going to show you the groups capability. I've got some simple groups out here. This is a site that we use more for demos. But I can go into some of the groups, and so I go into, if it'll open here, it's thinking, it's loading. There we go. So created this group down below for our Umlini, which is our managed service. So I can go in, I can add people to it. This is a private group that I've created where we have a shared calendar. What's interesting about this is I can now go over into things like calendar and find the same group activity. I don't think there's anything in the calendar here, but I can actually look at my calendar versus the group calendar. And so it's a way that if you have a project team or your management team or whatever, that you can have this experience that's across those activities. And as you go into, I don't have any specific examples around, I'm just going to show you Yammer here, but some specific examples around content. But if you are having conversations around content that's up into that's up in one of your groups, and you'll see the inline social conversation that's happening around that content as well. Just was going to show you some things again in I'll go to the home page here for Yammer. So here is one. Okay, there's a lot of noise around that. We're in the 50 thanks, but there is. So here, this is one of the sites. So if you're not yet a member of this yammer.com/ITPro network, which was the original name of the network, but it's now the Office 365 network, this is one that I highly recommend that you go and join. Because if you're looking for the latest conversations with Microsoft about new features that are coming out, this is where it's happening. So you have the various groups. And I'll show you that for our internal usage of Yammer, not as noisy, not as much activity. We're a smaller company, but going in, we have our, you can see just kind of the personality of the company. There's a lot of joking stuff. We've got a lot of fun things that we add in. I keep track of as I'm writing content and others that are presenting, of sharing links to articles and things for our company that we're using it as we learn new skills, and we do a lot of sharing knowledge transfer of things that we're like internal presentations of new technologies or successes on projects. We're constantly sharing what worked. We have a former company, we call them brown bags. We're on a regular basis, on a more than weekly basis, once or twice a week, that we have quick presentations where it's live happening in Yammer as well as being presented via a link meeting where we're sharing the results of a project, what was deployed, how we built it, what was unique about it, how it can be leveraged for other projects, other technologies. And we're sharing as much of that as we can through these social tools so that the next